In the ancient world, a time existed when the heavens and earth were not as separated as we might imagine today. There was a time when the divine and the mortal walked the same earth, intermingling in ways that would both inspire awe and provoke fear. In this story, we focus on a group of powerful celestial beings known as the Watchers. These angels, who were entrusted with the care of humanity, made a fateful choice that would change everything. If you're interested in this topic and want to learn more, make sure to hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss out on future videos that will definitely surprise you. The Watchers were once noble beings. They were created to observe the human world, to guide and watch over mankind's evolution. But, as we often see in stories of temptation, something began to stir in their hearts.
The earth was a beautiful and mysterious place, full of wonder and untold secrets.
As they looked down from the heavens, they began to feel a longing, a desire to interact with the humans they had been watching from afar. There was one among the Watchers, a leader of sorts, named Azazel. He was the one who first felt the pull of earthly desires. It was not just the beauty of humanity that drew him in, but the curiosity about their passions, their struggles, and their potential. Azazel and his fellow angels grew increasingly restless. They longed to walk among the mortals, to share in their experiences, to teach them, and even to share their forbidden knowledge. But the decision to come down to earth was not made lightly. The Watchers knew that they were crossing a boundary. They were stepping outside their divine purpose, forsaking their duty in favor of something that could ultimately destroy the delicate balance between heaven and earth. They were aware of the punishment that might come from their actions, but the allure of humanity, of their raw, untapped potential, was too great to ignore. So, the Watchers descended. Led by Azazel, they came to earth, leaving behind their celestial realm. The sky grew darker, and the earth seemed to stir as they arrived, their massive ethereal forms descending from the heavens. They stood taller than any mortal, their wings a tapestry of divine light. Yet, in spite of their grandeur, there was a sense of rebellion in their descent. They were no longer pure beings of light. They were choosing to live amongst humans and risk their eternal purity. As the Watchers descended, the people on earth gazed in awe at the strange otherworldly beings that had appeared before them. The Watchers did not immediately show their power or reveal their true nature. Instead, they chose to observe. They moved among the humans, silently studying them and their ways. But as they walked among the mortals, something changed in them. Their hearts began to grow heavier with the burden of temptation, and the knowledge of the world's secrets began to gnaw at their spirits. Soon, the Watchers could no longer remain silent. They were no longer content to merely observe. They wanted to share what they had learned in the heavens, the wisdom and mysteries that were forbidden to mankind. With their divine knowledge, they could change the course of human history, but at what cost? The first to act was Azazel. He taught humanity the arts of warfare, the forging of weapons that could alter the very fabric of existence. These weapons, once created, would serve as a powerful tool for domination and control. The Watchers did not stop there. They shared knowledge that had been hidden from humans for centuries. They taught them the secrets of astrology, the study of the stars, the movement of the heavens. They revealed the art of magic, of creating powerful spells that could bend reality itself. The humans began to learn, and they grew in knowledge and power. But with this newfound knowledge came a shift. The humans who learned from the Watchers began to change. They were no longer innocent beings. They now possessed the power to shape their destiny, to build empires, to wield magic, and to create weapons of unimaginable destruction. The balance between good and evil began to shift, and with it, the corruption that would seep into the world. The Watchers, once noble in their purpose, now found themselves trapped in a cycle of temptation. They were both guides and instigators, elevating the humans they watched, while also pushing them toward destruction. They had not foreseen the consequences of their actions, nor could they have known the wrath that would soon befall them. As the Watchers imparted their knowledge, something even more terrifying came to life: the Nephilim, the offspring of the Watchers and mortal women. These giants were born from the union of celestial beings and humans, creatures of immense power and strength. Their presence in the world would forever alter the course of history, leaving behind a legacy that would be both revered and feared for generations to come. The Watchers had intended to help humanity, but in doing so, they had unleashed something far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The world was no longer a place of simple, innocent existence. The Watchers had given humanity the gift of knowledge, but it came at a heavy price. They had broken the divine laws, and now, there would be no turning back. The descent of the Watchers was not just the beginning of their own fall from grace, it was the start of humanity's transformation. From this moment onward, nothing would be the same. The once pure angels had become instruments of change, but in their desire to help, they had brought about a great tragedy that would forever echo through the ages. As the Watchers stood among the mortals, they were filled with a profound sense of responsibility. Their purpose, after all, was to guide humanity, to help them unlock the hidden potential within themselves. Yet, the knowledge they brought was no ordinary wisdom. It was a gift, but also a curse. The forbidden arts they began to share with mankind would change everything. Azazel, the leader of the Watchers, was the first to impart his knowledge. He introduced the humans to the art of weaponry, the forging of metal into sharp, deadly tools. What started as a simple lesson in how to craft a sword quickly turned into something far more dangerous. Azazel showed the humans how to make weapons of war, how to smelt iron, how to create armor, how to build tools that could bring down entire civilizations. This knowledge was not simply about survival or defense, it was about domination. With these weapons, humans could not only defend themselves but conquer other tribes, take control of land, and claim power in ways they never could have imagined before. But it didn't stop with weapons. The Watchers, fascinated by the intellectual curiosity of humanity, began to share even deeper secrets. The art of astrology, once reserved for the gods, was passed down. The movements of the stars, the secrets of the universe, became known to the mortals. Through the stars, humans could predict the future, determine the best time for planting crops, and even unlock hidden truths about their own existence. The Watchers revealed to the humans the magic of numbers, of symbols, and of the hidden forces that controlled the universe. It was this knowledge that truly began to change the world. Humans were no longer the same creatures they had been before. They now understood the cosmos, the deep mysteries of nature, and the arts that had been kept hidden from them for centuries. With this knowledge, they were no longer helpless. They could shape the world as they saw fit. They could craft spells that defied nature itself, bend time and space, and heal wounds that were once thought incurable. Yet, even as the humans began to learn, something darker started to take shape. The knowledge shared by the Watchers came with a heavy price. As the mortals gained power, they became more ambitious, more ruthless, and more corrupted by the very knowledge that was meant to elevate them. The gift of wisdom had turned into a poison, slowly corrupting the hearts of the humans, making them lust for more power, more control, and more knowledge. The humans began to use the knowledge not just for good, but for conquest. Some used the secrets of astrology to manipulate their leaders, creating false prophecies that would secure their own positions of power. Others used the arts of war to expand their dominion, conquering neighboring tribes and enslaving those who stood in their way. The once simple mortals were now building empires, wielding power far beyond what their ancestors had ever dreamed possible. The Watchers, though they had intended to help, began to see the unintended consequences of their actions. Their teachings, once a beacon of hope and enlightenment, were now the source of destruction. They had given humanity the power to change the world, but they had not foreseen the darkness that this power would bring. The humans, now armed with forbidden knowledge, were no longer the innocent beings they had once been. They were becoming something more dangerous, something more powerful. Yet, the Watchers could not take back the knowledge they had given. The cat was out of the bag, so to speak. Humanity had tasted the fruit of forbidden wisdom, and there was no turning back. The once peaceful world had been irrevocably altered by the intervention of the celestial beings. What was meant to be a gift had become a curse, and the Watchers could only watch as their creation spiraled into chaos. As the power of the mortals grew, so did the distance between the Watchers and their original purpose. They had come to teach, to guide, and to protect, but now they were complicit in the unfolding destruction. They had given the humans the power to wield forces beyond their comprehension, and now the world was teetering on the edge of ruin. The knowledge that the Watchers had shared with humanity had not only changed the lives of individuals, but had begun to shape entire civilizations. The once innocent humans were now players on a grand stage, using the power they had gained to manipulate and control, to build and destroy, to rise to new heights and fall to new depths. The Watchers had been the catalysts of this change, and now they would have to face the consequences of their actions. As the Watchers descended upon Earth, their interactions with humanity brought forth something far more extraordinary and terrifying than they could have ever predicted. From the union between these celestial beings and mortal women came the Nephilim, giants of unimaginable power. These beings were not simply the children of angels and humans, They were something altogether different, something far beyond what humanity had ever conceived. The Nephilim stood as towering figures, their bodies massive and their strength unmatched. They were born of a divine and mortal lineage, their bloodline a mixture of the heavenly and the earthly. Their physical stature alone was enough to inspire awe and fear in those who saw them. But it was not just their size that set them apart, it was their presence. The Nephilim were a living testament to the power that the Watchers had unleashed upon the world. The first Nephilim were born in secret, hidden away from the world. Their mothers, mortal women who had been chosen by the Watchers, bore them in silence, fearing the power of their children. The Nephilim were not like ordinary humans. They were creatures of immense strength, speed, and intellect. They could move mountains and crush armies with a single blow. Their eyes gleamed with an unnatural intelligence, and their minds were capable of grasping concepts far beyond the comprehension of mere mortals. As the Nephilim grew, so did their influence. They were not content to remain hidden in the shadows. They stepped into the light, revealing their colossal forms to the world. The mortals who first encountered them were struck with a mixture of awe and terror. The Nephilim were giants, yes, but they were also beings of great intelligence and power. They were not simple creatures to be feared, they were beings to be revered, to be obeyed. But with their arrival came conflict. The Nephilim, born of divine blood, began to assert their dominance over the mortal world. They were not content with mere existence, they sought to rule. They could bend the world to their will, and they did so with a ruthlessness that shook the foundations of humanity. The first of the Nephilim, giants of legend, began to claim territories for themselves, building kingdoms that stretched across vast lands. They were not content with small victories, they wanted everything. They began to amass power, creating armies of their own and demanding the allegiance of those who dared to stand against them. The mortals, once innocent and untainted by the power of the Watchers, now faced a dilemma. Some chose to ally themselves with the Nephilim, seeking to gain favor with these powerful beings. Others resisted, terrified of the consequences of such alliances. But resistance was futile. The Nephilim were too powerful, too mighty to be opposed. The world began to tremble as the giants asserted their will, shaking the very earth beneath them. In time, the Nephilim became more than just rulers. They became gods in the eyes of those who served them. They demanded worship, adoration, and obedience. Their once mortal parents, the women who had borne them, watched in fear as their children grew into creatures of divine terror. The Nephilim were no longer simply offspring. They were beings of untold power, and their influence spread like a shadow across the world. Yet, despite their immense power, the Nephilim were not invincible. As their numbers grew, so did the resentment and fear of the humans they oppressed. The Watchers, too, began to see the consequences of their actions. The Nephilim were a force of nature, but they were also a ticking time bomb. Their dominance could not go unchallenged forever. The Watchers had given humanity the knowledge and power to rise up, but now, in the face of the Nephilim, it was unclear whether the mortals would survive. The Nephilim had come to Earth as giants, but they were also a symbol of the corruption that had taken root in the world. Their very existence was a reminder of the forbidden knowledge that had been passed down from the Watchers, a knowledge that had transformed the mortals into something dangerous and unpredictable. The giants walked the earth, but they were not the only ones to suffer the consequences of the Watchers' descent. Humanity, too, had been forever altered by the gifts they had received, and now they would have to face the repercussions of their actions. The story of the Nephilim was one of power, fear, and corruption. It was a tale of beings who had once been mortal, but had been transformed into something far more dangerous. The giants who walked the earth were not just creatures of strength, they were the living embodiment of the dangers of knowledge, of the temptation to reach beyond the boundaries of the natural world. And as the Nephilim spread their influence, the world would come to understand the true cost of the Watcher's gift. As the Nephilim walked the earth, their immense power began to warp the very fabric of reality. What had once been a world of balance and natural law now became a place where the lines between the divine and the mortal were blurred beyond recognition. The Watchers, in their desire to help humanity by imparting their forbidden knowledge, had unknowingly sown the seeds of chaos, and the consequences were now clear for all to see. The influence of the Nephilim was undeniable. They were not merely giants, they were conquerors, and their presence brought with it a profound shift in the way humanity viewed itself and its place in the world. The mortals who had once lived simple, humble lives now found themselves caught in a whirlwind of ambition, power, and corruption. The knowledge that the Watchers had passed down was no longer a gift, it had become a curse. With the Nephilim's rise to power, entire civilizations were overturned. The once peaceful tribes that dotted the earth began to fall one by one. The Nephilim and their followers swept across the land, claiming kingdoms, crushing those who dared to resist. The giants were no longer seen as beings of awe. They had become despots, rulers who demanded absolute loyalty and reverence. Under their rule, the human world became a battleground for power. The Nephilim's dominion stretched far and wide, and those who stood against them were quickly crushed beneath their heels. But it was not only through conquest that the Nephilim changed the earth. The very fabric of society began to unravel as humans, once content with their simple lives, began to mimic the behavior of the giants. They too, now armed with forbidden knowledge, sought to emulate the power of the Nephilim. What had once been a peaceful world, governed by natural law, was now a world ruled by greed, ambition, and desire for control. Humanity's relationship with the divine was forever altered. Where once they had looked to the heavens for guidance, they now sought to manipulate the forces that had been given to them. The power of the Watchers was not just knowledge, it was an all-consuming desire for control. Humans, no longer content with their place in the world, sought to shape it to their own will. The earth itself began to reflect this shift. The once bountiful lands began to wither as human greed took root. Rivers that once flowed freely now ran dry as the earth's natural rhythms were disrupted by the ambitions of mortals and giants alike. Even the very heavens seemed to respond to this corruption. The stars, once a symbol of divine order, now flickered uncertainly in the sky. The skies darkened as if they too were mourning the fall of mankind. The earth trembled with the weight of the Nephilim's power, and the mortals who followed them began to turn on each other. Empires rose and fell in the blink of an eye as alliances shifted like the wind, and those who were once allies now became enemies. The Watchers, who had once seen themselves as guides, now found themselves responsible for a world on the brink of collapse. They had shared their knowledge with the humans, thinking they would guide them to greater heights. But instead, they had unleashed a force that was now beyond their control. The Nephilim had transformed humanity into something far darker than they had ever intended. What had once been a world of innocent beings had now become a world of power-hungry mortals and giants, each vying for supremacy. The destruction was not just physical. The moral fabric of humanity had been torn asunder. The original, simple values of love, honor, and respect were replaced with a thirst for power and domination. The Nephilim, with their divine blood, had become the epitome of this new world order. They were not just rulers, they were gods, and their presence cast a long shadow over the earth. The humans who had once looked to the stars for guidance now saw the Nephilim as their gods. They worshipped them, revered them, and sought to follow in their footsteps. The Watchers, witnessing this transformation, began to realize the full extent of their actions. What they had hoped would be a gift to humanity had become the catalyst for destruction. They had shown the mortals the forbidden knowledge of the divine, but they had failed to foresee the consequences. The Watchers had intended to elevate humanity, but instead, they had given rise to a new era of corruption, violence, and chaos. Now, the Watchers could only watch in horror as the world they had once known was consumed by the very knowledge they had shared. The earth was no longer the same place. It had been irrevocably altered by the influence of the Nephilim, and by the greed and ambition of those who followed them. The corruption of humanity was complete. The balance that had once existed between the divine and the mortal had been shattered, and the world would never be the same again. As the corruption spread across the earth, the heavens above grew silent, observing the chaos that had been wrought by the Watchers' descent. What had begun as a noble mission, guiding humanity, sharing wisdom, and elevating their existence, had now spiraled into an uncontrollable disaster. The Nephilim walked the earth as tyrants, their colossal forms casting shadows over the land, while the human world descended into a frenzy of war, manipulation, and moral decay. The Watchers had long since lost control of the knowledge they had shared, and now, the divine order was about to take its toll. The angels who had once served as guardians of the earth now found themselves standing at the precipice of judgment. Their decision to descend and share forbidden knowledge was not without consequence. In the eyes of the divine, they had crossed a sacred boundary. The law that bound the heavens to the earth had been broken, and the consequences of this transgression would be dire. The divine response was swift, and it was absolute. The great forces of the heavens, once distant and silent, now moved with terrible purpose. The Watchers, who had once basked in the light of the divine, were now to be cast down. The punishment would not be a mere reprimand, it would be a binding, an eternal sentence that would leave them chained for the rest of time. It was Enoch, the one human who had remained pure and faithful to the divine will, who was chosen to deliver the message of judgment. Enoch had walked with the gods and had been granted glimpses into the divine realm. He had seen the truth of what the Watchers had done, and he had seen the consequences of their actions. Now he was to stand before them as the harbinger of divine wrath, the one who would convey the message that no one, not even the angels, was beyond the reach of the divine judgment. Enoch, with a heavy heart, ascended to the heavens, where the great assembly of angels awaited him. There, in the presence of the Almighty, he spoke of the crimes committed by the Watchers. He spoke of the knowledge they had shared with humanity, the lives they had corrupted, and the chaos they had unleashed. He spoke of the Nephilim, the giants who had emerged from their union with mortal women, and the devastation they had caused. The words he spoke were heavy with the weight of truth, and as they echoed across the celestial halls, they left no doubt about the severity of the Watchers' transgressions. The judgment was swift. The Watchers were condemned to eternal punishment. They would not be allowed to walk the earth again, nor would they be permitted to return to the heavens. Instead, they were cast into the darkest depths of the abyss, where they would remain bound in chains for all eternity. Their once glorious wings were clipped, and their once magnificent forms were reduced to mere shadows of what they had been. They were to be forgotten by the world they had once tried to guide, their names erased from history. As the Watchers were cast down, the earth trembled. The consequences of their actions had not only brought about their own downfall, but had also left a permanent scar on the world. The knowledge they had shared with humanity would never be forgotten. The Nephilim, too, would remain in the world, their legacy a constant reminder of the Watchers' fall from grace. But the divine wrath did not end with the Watchers' punishment. The earth itself had been corrupted by their presence, and now it too would face its reckoning. The heavens rained down upon the earth, cleansing it of the corruption that had spread through every corner of the world. The great flood, an act of divine mercy and judgment, would wash away the sins of the world, purging the earth of the Nephilim and their followers. The flood would not only be the end of an era, it would be the beginning of a new one. The world would be reset, its foundations shaken, and from the depths of destruction, a new humanity would arise, one that would never again forget the lessons of the past. The divine wrath had been carried out. The Watchers had been cast down, and the earth had been cleansed. But the legacy of their actions would live on, not just in the stories of the Nephilim and the fallen angels, but in the hearts of humanity. The lesson was clear: knowledge, when misused, could bring about destruction. Power, when unchecked, could corrupt even the purest of beings. And so, the judgment was complete. The Watchers, once revered and adored, were now nothing more than a cautionary tale, their names whispered in fear and regret. The earth would go on, but it would never be the same. The divine order had been restored, but at a cost that would be felt for generations to come. As the storm of divine judgment passed and the earth began to heal, the legacy of the Watchers endured. Their fall, their rebellion against the divine order, and the consequences of their actions left an indelible mark on both the celestial and mortal realms. The world would never be the same, and humanity, in its newfound knowledge and power, would carry the lessons of the Watchers for generations to come. The story of the Watchers is not merely one of celestial beings who fell from grace. It is a story of temptation, rebellion, and the consequences of wielding knowledge that is beyond one's understanding. The Watchers sought to uplift humanity by sharing the secrets of the divine, but in doing so, they unleashed forces that they could not control. They gave humanity the gift of wisdom, but with it came a burden that would forever change the course of history. In the end, the Watcher's tale is a cautionary one. It teaches us that knowledge, when misused, can be as destructive as it is powerful. The very gift that the Watchers sought to offer, wisdom, understanding, and power, became a curse. Their actions set in motion a chain of events that led to the rise of the Nephilim, the corruption of humanity, and the eventual divine reckoning. Their desire to help, their longing to share, was not inherently evil, but in their arrogance, they failed to foresee the consequences of their decisions. They failed to understand that humanity, unprepared for such power, would be consumed by it. And what of humanity itself? The story of the Watchers is also the story of human nature. It is a reflection of the deep, sometimes dangerous desire for knowledge, power, and control that lies within all of us. The humans who received the wisdom of the Watchers were not innocent bystanders. They too played a role in the unfolding of the disaster. They too chose to embrace the forbidden knowledge, to wield it for their own gain, without considering the costs. The Nephilim, the offspring of the Watchers, were born of this same desire to rise above and conquer, to take what was forbidden and use it to shape the world. The legacy of the Watchers is a reminder that power is not a gift to be taken lightly. Whether it is the power of knowledge, the power of the divine, or the power of creation, it carries with it a responsibility. The Watchers did not fully understand the weight of their actions when they shared their forbidden knowledge with humanity. But their story is not just one of regret, it is one of redemption. For the story of the Watchers is not the end of humanity's journey, but a new beginning. The great flood that washed away the corruption was not just an act of divine punishment, it was an act of mercy. It was the reset the earth needed, the cleansing of the world so that a new generation of humans could emerge, one that would remember the lessons of the past. The earth would rebuild, and humanity, though forever changed, would carry on. They would remember the Watchers, their rise and their fall, and the consequences of their decisions. And in that remembering, they would strive to build a better world, one that would never again fall prey to the same temptations that had led to the Watchers' downfall. As the story of the Watchers fades into legend, it continues to resonate through the ages. Their tale is told in whispers, passed down from generation to generation, a warning to those who would seek forbidden knowledge or power. The Watchers' legacy teaches us that while knowledge is a powerful tool, it is a tool that must be used wisely. It reminds us that power, when unchecked, can corrupt even the most noble of beings. And it calls upon us to remember that even in the darkest of times, there is always the possibility of redemption, of a new beginning. The Watchers may have fallen, but their story lives on, woven into the fabric of human history. And as long as humanity remembers their tale, they will continue to learn, grow, and evolve, always seeking wisdom, but never forgetting the lessons of the past.